This is Rogers TV. The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers Cable or Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guest is Alex Ruff, the MP for Bruce Grey Owen Sound, a well-known face and figure both in our community and, of course, on Politically Speaking. Alex, good to see you again.
Good to be back, David.
Now, you're in Ottawa because the House is in session, correct?
No, I'm sitting in my office here in Owen Sound. This is a constituency week.
Ah, okay. Well, that explains why the heat has been tempered in Ottawa. Once the budget was introduced, the temperature got lowered a bit because nobody was in town.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you're in Owen Sound, you're not responsible for the snow that arrived this morning, are you?
No, not at all. As I said, during the week, weather is a provincial responsibility. I only take care of the weekends.
Ah, all right. Well, they're calling for rain and warm weather on the weekend, so I guess the farmers can use that.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, Alex, it's been kind of since we last talked. It's been an interesting, how shall I say it, an interesting turn of events on many fronts in Ottawa. But we've talked about your private members bill, the security clearance bill that was introduced, and it has been introduced. And so, what's the status of that private members bill?
So it was just finally last week that I was able to move it for debate, and so we've had our first hour of debate with the bill. And for your viewers out there, just to understand what my bill ultimately does, it just allows parliamentarians, so both members of parliament and senators, to apply for a security clearance, a secret security clearance. And because basically right now, if you're not uniquely positioned and have the privilege like I do, that because of my position on the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, which requires a top secret security clearance, the bureaucracy, really the Privy Council's office, is going to deny a member of parliament's application right from the get-go, not because they don't qualify for it, but they're going to say you don't really have a need to know. I think the evidence is clearly there around a few fronts with specific events that have occurred over the last number of years, that with the world becoming more volatile, just how complicated things are with like foreign interference in our democratic processes and institutions, that and the recommendations that have been coming out of some of the reports and inquiries and investigations that have already occurred, members of parliament, as the representatives of the Canadian people and the senators too, do have a need to know sometimes. So what my bill isn't trying to, provide the be all and end all that just because you have a security clearance that you get access to national secrets. That's not how our process of protecting classified or sensitive information even works in the first place. I had maintained my top secret security clearance even when I retired from the military and got elected. For those first couple of years, I still had a top secret security clearance. Did the government ever give me access to anything? No, because I'm not in government, don't have a need to know. There wasn't an event. Although, I did offer that when the convoy was going on, the convoy protests in Ottawa, because the government at that time was making the case that they needed to invoke the Emergencies Act because of the national threats. Well, I said, and they're saying, just trust us. I made the case even in my speech then. Well, there's a number of us that do have security clearances. There's former privy councillors that have all been vetted, that therefore they can get read in and briefed on this material. And then if they go back to their respective party caucuses and brief to say, look, the government's saying just trust us, but I've seen the information. I can't give you the details, but yes or no, I believe that it's legitimate to, in that case, to invoke the Emergencies Act. So really, all my bill does is allows parliamentarians to apply for a secret security clearance. It doesn't guarantee that they'll pass. And it doesn't guarantee that once they have been given that security clearance, that they will ever get access to anything. But it will prevent the ad hoc nature and the delays that occur in getting answers to issues of concern to Parliament. And providing better accountability and transparency. And I'll give you two examples. One, under the Harper government around the Afghan detainee files that ultimately resulted in an ad hoc committee being formed, select members from the different parties getting a security clearance and then being able to see the information and then ultimately help being involved with the process to release it. The exact same thing just happened just recently in the last year or two here in the current Parliament with respect to the Winnipeg Lab scandal and those Winnipeg Lab files, which ultimately was the decision, even though Parliament had demanded it before the last election. A majority of MPs voted to release the documentation. It resulted in the government stonewalling it, taking the speaker to court, but ultimately that all disappeared when the election was called in 2021, so it never did go forward. My point is, if part of the reason was that they had to form this special committee, get these people cleared, which takes months because they don't have their clearances already, it just slows everything down. And then ultimately, as we saw with the release of those documents just a few months ago, pretty much everything was actually released to the public. So it wasn't about national secrets. It was actually about political embarrassment, which is what we kind of want to avoid, governments utilizing security classification for it. So I'm just saying there's two examples under two different governments where if my bill had been in place and say all the members of either the Public Safety Committee, the Health Committee, Defense, Foreign Affairs, whatever committee, if they all had security clearances already, or the majority of them did, and there's enough members within the respective parties, then you can create a special committee, or those already existing parliamentary committees could study it. And again, because they have to demonstrate to the government, and the government in the end could choose to say, no, the information is still too sensitive. But again, it's hard to say we don't trust you if they've already gone through the process and been vetted by the thing. So ultimately, the initial debates occurred. I would say, based on the speeches that I've heard, the blocker in support, unfortunately, the NDP didn't have anybody there that day that was capable to speak to it. So they'll speak during the second hour of debate because private members' bills only get debated for 2 hours at each stage. The Liberals that did speak to it, they were cagey. They haven't indicated their support. They flagged some concerns, but again, I sort of addressed them, and I was kind of hoping they'd ask some of those questions. Even I tried to answer them during my speech on it, because I'm the only one as the sponsor of the bill that actually gets questions. It's one of the unique rules around private members' business. Everybody else can give a speech, but you don't actually have to take any questions from the other members. So I talked to the Parliamentary Secretary for Public Safety and Democratic Reform. That's Jennifer Connolly. I think if I got her last name right, I always forget if it's O'Connell or Connolly. I can't remember, but I think anyway, she's the one that gave the speech. And I went and talked to her for about 10 minutes afterwards to explain, like, look, some of your concerns are all valid concerns, but they're not impacted by my bill, because my bill doesn't actually allow certain things. It's very simple. When you read it, the actual change to the Parliament of Canada Act is one sentence. The preamble is 20 times longer than the actual changes to the Parliament of Canada Act, because I try to lay out the logic behind it. So long-winded update there, David, but my bill has been first hour debate. Right now, the second hour is slated for, I think, early June. So it would come to a vote, and we'll see if it gets sent to committee at that point or whether it gets defeated. If it gets defeated, it's done. And if I can try to move it up into the May timeframe, I will, by trading. That's how sort of the only way you can get farther up is if one of my colleagues, or it doesn't matter which party they're in, that's slated, if for some reason they can't be there or debate their bill, I can try to do a trade with them and get farther up in the order of precedence.
Sure. Well, in some ways it sounds logical in that what you're really doing is as I understand it, the security clearance process is a two-step clearance. First of all is the basic security clearance itself, but the second is need to know. And you're just saying, okay, let's if certain people in certain roles in Parliament should be allowed to apply and receive security clearance. Step one. Just step one. That's all it's being asked.
And then step two, you got to
yeah.
pass it. You actually got to get accepted. And to be honest, and I even said this in my speech, there's likely MPs in all parties that would fail the clearance process, not because they've done something nefarious or anything bad. The problem that people that normally do get denied for security clearances is because they try to hide something, not something that, because again, you're not getting in trouble. It's not like you sped, you did something, maybe you used drugs when you were young before marijuana, you smoked marijuana before it was legal. That's actually in the military where a lot of individuals failed to get their clearance was because they weren't truthful. If you're truthful, it's good to go, because what they're trying to do is determine whether or not you're a security risk. If you have something, if you're hiding something, then it could be used against you sort of from whether it's a foreign state or criminal organization, that they could blackmail you and hold it over you and make you a security risk. But if you have nothing to hide, and even when you've done something, as long as that's the other option, is some members likely won't, or parliamentarians won't choose to apply to it, because you are giving the whole national security apparatus, the RCMP, CSIS, and everybody, even the financials, you're basically opening up your personal life to say, here's everything I have. You have permission to contact my bank, do a criminal check, do everything on me to see whether or not I'd be a potential security risk. So some parliamentarians may say, I'm already a public figure, but I really don't need the whole apparatus digging into me and looking into my life. And so some people may choose not to apply, because again, that's what I'm doing. I'm not, initially when I envisioned this idea, I was going to kind of make it mandatory, but then I realized that would never fly. I wouldn't even get support for that, likely within my own party. Although there are colleagues of mine that when we were first debating and discussing this internally, they would say we should absolutely make everybody have to do it. And if you fail it, you shouldn't be allowed to be a member of parliament. But again, some of us think that way. Others say that isn't how our democracy works.
Well, I understand that the vetting by the parties to be a candidate is significant. Probably not at the level of the kind of thing you're of a security clearance, but it is extremely significant. And if I recall,
it is more
stories of people being refused because something in their background.
It's actually more intrusive. They just don't have access to sort of stuff from like a criminal check. You actually have to give the party, at least I can't speak for all parties, I just can speak for my own party. When I applied to be a candidate back in 2019, I basically gave the party permission to a financial check on me, do a criminal check, like contact the law enforcement to do that. But I mean, obviously the party doesn't own resources, but you got to provide a list of, here's all my social media, here's a list of all my email addresses, phone numbers, like you do provide. The application process alone is way longer than it is to apply for a security clearance. I think the application was just shy of 100 pages of information that you have to provide them and forms to sign. So it is very, and rightfully so, a political party's in the business of hoping to elect, especially at the the federal or the provincial level, elect people to the respective legislatures. And you don't want somebody that isn't honest. And then as we've seen happen in different campaigns across the country at different times over the years, all of a sudden something comes out and that person doesn't win, right? So parties are in the business of trying to win and elect their candidates. So they want to know everything that could potentially be embarrassing or have a negative impact on chances of success.
Or sometimes a candidate will be removed. We've seen that happen certainly at the provincial level, and I think occasionally at the federal level.
2021 election, Kevin Vaughan, who sits as an independent MP,
right?
Again, ultimately, the charges that were dropped that had been alleged against him. He ultimately did plead guilty because he's a reserve officer in the Canadian Navy out of Toronto, but ultimately he was pleaded guilty to failing to tell his military chain of command, which again, it's tricky with the reserve sometimes because it's not a full-time job. He's doing it part-time, but he pled guilty and recognized his mistake there. So ultimately all charges were dropped, and that sort of was his excuse, I think, for saying he didn't. But the bottom line, he was dropped he wasn't off the ballot because it was too late to pull him. It was too late because he was running as a Liberal member of Parliament or a Liberal candidate, but the Liberals dropped him from their caucus. So he was elected, but he was elected really as an independent.
Yeah, the rabbit trails you can go down in this are quite remarkable. Quite remarkable. It's a simple, like you say, it's one sentence. The change is one sentence, but the ramifications are significant. Well, speaking of security and security clearances and so on, that leads me to ask you a question about foreign interference, which has been a huge topic in Ottawa, but also certainly in the public sphere. Um, you know, I honestly can't say that we've had foreign interference here, but who knows? You never know. You just don't know what kind of these things are. What's your take on all of this foreign interference question, Alex?
Well, yeah. So look, I got to be cautious because I am one of the few Canadians that have sat on this committee, and I've had access to everything at the highest sensitive level. So I've been briefed on everything that people have been reading about over the last couple of years. And we spent the longest time of any report that the NSICOP, the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentaries, has studied anything. So we've tabled our report with the Prime Minister a few weeks back. It should be out, I think, by no later than the end of May. He has 30 House sitting days to table it in Parliament. And of course, unlike the previous report that our committee tabled on the federal mandate of the RCMP, where only 2 paragraphs out of a whole 80-page document were classified or redacted. My gut's saying a whole bunch of this one will be redacted. However, we purposely wrote it so that the summary, the findings, and the recommendations should all be crystal clear, open to the public. And I'll share that, in my opinion, the government, it's not going to be a good day for the government when our report comes out. And remember, it's an all-party committee, and nothing makes the report unless it has unanimous consent of the whole committee. And really the strength of that is there's more Liberals sit on the committee than any of the other parties that are represented. There's supposed to be 4 Liberals on the committee. We lost 2 partway through the process because James Maloney and Ikra Khalid were named as parliamentary secretaries. Once you're named as a parliamentary secretary, they had to come off the committee. Just this past week, they've announced Darren Fisher, one of the Liberals that is coming onto the committee. But anyway, there's 4 Liberal positions, 2 Conservative, 1 Bloc, 1 NDP, and 3 senators. And everything in that report, as I said, requires unanimous consent of all of us in order for it to go forward. So I think that's really the strength, and why I would argue our report will in some ways even be more important. And it's not because of me being on it or any of us that sit on it, but because of that democratic nature of it versus the public inquiry that Justice Hogue has been currently doing, is that when it comes out, this is really all of us that represent all the parties in the House of Commons, other than the Green, the recognized parties. And we are saying, hey, government, you need to pay attention in the following areas when it comes to foreign interference. But what I would share, go back and read online right now for any of your viewers, go to the NSICOP website and look at their 2019 annual report by that committee before I was on it, and read, I think it's chapter 5 or there's 55 pages on foreign interference in that document, and read the recommendations that are all unclassified. And I would argue you may see something that looks very similar to the recommendations that was given to the government 4 years ago. And the big question I think you may see that come out in our report will say, well, we told you so. Why didn't you do something about this 4 years ago?
Where does Elections Canada fit into this? Because it's election interference, but our electoral process is handled by basically a body that is accountable to Parliament. It's not responsible solely to the government. Where do you see Elections Canada's role in all of this?
So Elections Canada does have a role, and in fact, we do. And as I said, I won't get into specifics, but that is something that's was looked at before. But we met with the commissioner, CEO of Elections Canada during our study, and there is I I think there is need to improve how information flows from our public safety and national security organizations to Elections Canada to allow them to do things. But you got to remember, there is the site task force. There's a whole bunch of these processes and non-politically aligned, like nonpartisan government bureaucracy organizations that exist with deputy ministers that are supposed to do certain things and flag certain things. But ultimately, the real challenge, without getting into the specifics, it really comes around thresholds. And we've heard this in the media. We've heard this in certain discussions from the public committee meetings that occurred at Procedure and House Affairs and within other committees in the House. What is the threshold? How, and I mean, I've publicly stated I'm a big believer that the 2021 election, the overall result was fair and democratic. That no matter, any interference that did occur did not change the overall result. I personally believe it did have an impact, whether it changed individual ridings or not, but I personally believe it did have an impact at the individual riding level. And we heard at the public inquiry when the Honorable Aaron O'Toole testified, it's his personal belief based on it that it potentially impacted anywhere 5 to 9 ridings. So it wouldn't have changed the overall result, but it changed one. So I think there's a question that needs to get wrestled down by Parliament, in particular the House, because we're the elected side and this is really who it impacts. But bigger than that, and Elections Canada does have a role, is how do you determine and how does information flow if you think it's going to even impact one riding? Because I would argue one riding is one riding too many if the results change in even one single riding. And of course, it could have an impact if you get down to a point where you're literally, there's only one seat difference between potentially who has the privilege of forming government and who doesn't. Well,
I think from the Hogan Inquiry, we're seeing that there are issues around communication. It appears there appears to be issues around timing, and as you said, who's doing what, and who's responsible to what, and in what time frame. It's way above my pay grade, I'll tell you that. But it's certainly, I will certainly keep an eye on that on your report, because I think it's going to be. Well, we're probably within the next few months, we're going to be in an election. Might be a year, might be 18 months, but we're going to be in an election, and we want to have the confidence in our electoral process. In fact, I'll even give a shout out to Elections Canada for the way they do handle things, because at least locally, it's interesting work. Next election, if anyone wants a job, interesting work. But, we need to have confidence in our electoral process.
Absolutely. And I mean, as I said, that's why our committee and our report, I think, is arguably it's the most important report that committee has done. And I've only been on it for a couple of years. So I think it's the 12th or 13th report overall that committee's produced. And I would argue by far it is the most important report. And in all likelihood, I don't know if even regardless of how long I stay involved in politics, I would, hopefully I never have to deal with anything of such importance ever again, like that we've handled our, national security threats properly. But it is because it gets to what you just mentioned, David. The public, Canadians have to trust our democratic institutions and processes, because that is ultimately how our whole democracy works and forms. And when people don't trust it, that's going to result in further breakdowns in civil, with civil disorder, and even just, again, turn to less and less people getting involved in the democratic process. And I've said this publicly countless times. I've been in the countries where the citizens don't have the right or privilege to vote and be engaged in determining who represents them and how governments are formed within their respective countries. We vote. We have that privilege here in Canada, and please vote. And I'll say it again, I would rather lose the next federal election because all 100% of the eligible voters in Bruce Grey, Owen Sound voted, and I lose, because you can't argue that. If 100% voted, then the people elected who they wanted, versus winning when only 65% of them vote, right? So now I want to win, and I'll do my best to convince all 100% that I'm the best candidate. But my point is, I just believe so much in our democratic privilege of voting, and I just want people to vote. Even if they're upset, they don't want to vote for anybody, at least show up and spoil your ballot, because nobody knows if you spoiled your ballot at the individual level, but at least you've engaged, and then that gives you the fundamental right to complain when you're not happy with whoever you did elect to represent. You know, if you didn't vote for them, then you can complain to them. But if you didn't vote at all, then it's you know, you kind of get what you know. If you didn't get engaged and you didn't help determine who that is, then you know, whatever. I mean, I'll still listen to everybody. It's my job. It's all elected officials to listen to everybody that you represent. But
let's take it just one step deeper, because it's not just a matter of voting. Sometimes it's a matter of also physically actually getting engaged, because as I recall from the last both provincial and federal elections, and even at our municipal level, there were far more candidates running. 6, 7, 8, 9 candidates at the provincial and federal level. And a lot of these candidates were simply people who were passionate and interested and wanted to see their voice heard. They got their platform, and, the voting result is the voting result. But they took it seriously enough. And having interviewed all of them, I have to say what impressed me the most was their passion for the democratic process. Didn't agree, but they didn't agree with everybody else, but they at least took it seriously enough to engage.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think we had 6 candidates at both the last 2 federal elections, which is still good considering it's a party construct. But and voting turnout at the federal level has been fairly consistent around that 65 to 68% here in Bruce Grey Owen Sound, which is around the national average. However, we saw in the last provincial election, voter turnout was really down across the province. But at the municipal level, like you're right, there was some municipalities I think it was Grey Highlands had something like 17 people running for council or something like that. They had a record number. But at the same time, there was a couple other municipalities where the majority of the people were all just acclaimed because they only had the bare minimum running. But voter turnout, like that's what really shocked me in the last municipal election, was just how low voter turnout was, because in some cases it was down around, I think, as low as 27% in one of the municipalities. And what I don't, from now having been in this job for 4+ years, it's a lot of people come to me with issues and concerns, and every day it's like, well, you're actually talking to your wrong representative. This is a municipal issue. Have you talked to the mayor and council? And a lot of the stuff that impacts people on a day-to-day basis, whether it's, their bridges, their roads, their, health, property taxes, bus routes, et cetera, those are all municipal level authorities. And I'm just surprised that more people don't get out and vote during that process to determine who's going to represent, and advocate for those issues that matter most to them. So it is a little different. Maybe that speaks to, because there is no political parties behind those candidates running at that level, there's not as much platform necessarily or things that get advertised. And so it's harder to maybe judge at that level. I mean, you're more in tune and tied into it than I am at the municipal level. But it'd be a fascinating study, because I do know certain countries do actually utilize, I think even Quebec, does have political parties at the municipal level.
Montreal does for sure. Sure. It's one of those interesting differences. But Alex, I hate to shut this off, but my voice in my ear is telling me we got to take a break. So there's more to talk about. So friends, I'm David Shearman. This is Politically Speaking. We'll be right back.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
TV.
Sports is life. It's clear cut. Everything's out in the open. There's nowhere to hide. I had to prove myself more than anyone else.
You must be so proud of your son. He's gonna go pro. The sky's the limit.
There's always a winner and a loser.
You cannot reach the sky in broken cleats.
Of course, I always want to be the winner. And I did reach the sky.
Norman Kwong, the first Chinese-Canadian professional football player, still holds records to this day. He retired from the sport in 1960 and later became Lieutenant Governor of Alberta.
Joining us on the next Grey County Life, we'll be joined by Tom and Sam from the upcoming production Sexy Laundry.
Also, Katie McLeish will be joining us from the Owen Sound Library to talk about the Youth Film Festival. And Renee will be here from the Owen Sound Animal Shelter on Grey County Life.
Hi, and welcome back to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guest today is Alex Ruff, MP for Bruce Grey Owen Sound. And, you know, I'm really quite fascinated by this whole issue of foreign interference, not just as a person, but also as a person who follows politics. So I really want to express my appreciation to you, Alex, for your insights, because you are right there, and there are some things you can't talk about, and I recognize that. But the point is, you can give us, and have flagged for my listeners, my viewers here, the fact that this will be coming up in the next month or so. It'll certainly before the summer, and that's something we should all be watching if we do care about our democratic processes. That's for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into another. How shall I say it? Interesting topic, and that's the budget. I mean, this was a different budget because the government decided to do a 2-week dog and pony show. Oops, did I say that? Dog and pony show to trot out all of the stuff. There was no budget secrecy. There was none of, well, sort of, but there was none of the traditional, we'll just wait and see. It was presented to the Canadian public, and so it's up for debate now, isn't it?
It is up. We've already had the first day of debate. The next few days are all slated. There's 4 days of debate that happen with the budget, and they're all slated to occur this coming week when we get back next week to Ottawa. So the budget debate will get completed, and then I keep forgetting, because it gets a little bit complicated, and I don't know if it does anything after that. I think we just do the 4 days of debate on the budget, and then they have to bring forth what's called the BIA, or the Budget Implementation Act, which then implements it. Now that could be that there's no limit really. There's no set number of days to debate it. It could go on forever, I think, to some extent, and it'll depend on how many speakers want to speak to it and what tools the government uses to make sure it gets through. But traditionally, the budget, it's one of the last things that will get through the whole process between now and the end of June. And it's normally the final thing that they use as sort of the crux, even in the Senate, because once it leaves, obviously, the House, it has to go over to the Senate, and it will normally drag on for a couple months. But to be frank, we still haven't finished passing the fall economic statement. So it is still being debated, which actually happened, I think, almost identically last year or 2 years ago, where I remember we were joking that the budget might get passed before the previous year's fall economic statement. So it's just part of the way that debate occurs in the House of Commons, and the government ultimately controls the legislative agenda. They get to determine what's going to get debated when, and that's the challenge they have sometimes, is what's their priorities. And normally the budget will get through before June, one way or not, unless it gets defeated. Obviously, the Bloc and my party, the Conservatives, have already come out publicly stating we will not support the budget. And the NDP have said they're still weighing it. I just did watch their new finance critic, which is Don Davies, who I actually sit on the National Security and Intelligence Committee with. Don's now become their new finance critic. And I watched an interview he did this past weekend, and he wouldn't answer that question when it kept getting put to him by the reporter, other than to say that they're going to uphold their agreement on supply and confidence that they've signed until June of 2025. So I would to me, that would be the indication that they plan on supporting it. There are aspects they've indicated they support, obviously, but they have concerns around other parts of it. So anyway, we'll see how it all plays out and how long because that helps determine too whether or not they're going to continue to support the government's curtailing a debate and the use of the programming or time allocation motions to get stuff through faster. So we'll see how that all plays out next week. It'll be an interesting week, and they've already passed the government with the NDP support and ability to have debate go to basically midnight any night that they want it to. So we could be in for some long days, and this is traditionally happens May to the end of June.
And let's be clear that a budget is a confidence matter, and that if it is defeated, we're all of a sudden we're in an election, whether we like it or not. But sounds like the odds are it'll get passed. Dare I say it, with the NDP holding their nose?
That'd be a good question for the NDP representation, but yeah, I think that there's going to be some level of that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. One also wonders what the trade-offs will be, because one of the supply and confidence agreement is based on basically trade-offs. And it'll be interesting to see what gets done, what gets traded, and we'll never know because until it's sort of public in the public purview. But it will be very interesting to see what the trades are on this one. Pharmacare is a good example. I think the Liberal government had to say, we will introduce pharmacare to get NDP support. And away we go. But we'll see. What about the budget seemed to work for you? I mean, the budget is full of all kinds of stuff. Was there anything that would work? Or was it all mostly?
Look, normally in past budgets, I sometimes try to put out a press release and, on what I sort of think was nice to see and what I disagree with and why I'd be voting against it. The problem this time, and I mean, I haven't finished my analysis. Again, budgets went from where 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they were 60-page documents. Now it's 416 or 460 pages long. So it does take longer to go through all aspects of it. Let's look, they've tried to sell a couple of things that's going to support youth. One, or allow people to get into the home ownership a lot easier. So they're changing the amortization rules so you can have 30-year mortgages. I support that. If that was the only thing in it and it was a balanced budget, I could vote for it, right? But it's not really going to change that much because, I mean, it is going to make people's payments lower, but they're going to end up paying more interest on that mortgage because now it's being dragged out for an additional 5 years. So but again, I'm fine with that. That gives more option, more choice to people trying to buy homes. So no issues there. The other thing that they changed that they try to profess, I think they've changed. So they've doubled almost the amount of money that somebody buying a first-time homeowner could take from their RSPs to put as a down payment on their house. The problem is I think whether they doubled it and allowed it from 30,000 to 60,000 or whatever the number is. What young person has $60,000 socked away in an RSP in the first place, right? And especially since TFSAs have been approved, they're already allow a significant amount of money that people can save, and they're going to put their money into their TFSA before they put it into an RSP. So it's really a bit of a red herring in my viewpoint. So there's not a lot in the bill that yet, or the budget that I've yet could say, all right, you know what, that aspect of it's good. I'm sure there is. I'm sure there's some other small stuff. But what bothers me more than anything is just the sheer, like they're putting another $40 billion onto our national debt. And the servicing of that national debt now is $54 billion over the year. Every penny that Canadian taxpayers pay on GST now, whether you're filling up your vehicle at the gas station, whether you're buying, a chocolate bar at the convenience store, or you're going to the hardware store to pick something up, every penny of GST isn't going towards healthcare transfers or to support our military or any of the other social benefits and programs that the federal government's responsible for, your old age, your CPP, or anything like that. Every penny of it is going to service the national debt. More money is going to service the national debt. And it was actually Tom Mulcair that first brought this up when the budget was first released, then is going for transfers to the provinces and territories for healthcare, almost double what we're putting into our Canadian Armed Forces. So we need to get that under control. We demanded ahead of time, you got to get rid of the carbon tax. I mean, we put another motion that we thought might have got through, was even just a spike, or a freeze on the carbon tax increase there for April 1st. Unfortunately, that failed again, didn't get through, despite the NDP now publicly announcing that they're questioning the validity of the carbon tax and the continued raises of it. And so that's one aspect, that obviously the tax increases are still coming through the budget. We haven't weighed in, we're still studying, but I mean, a lot of pushback from small business entrepreneurs and former Liberal Bank of Canada Governor and Deputy Minister of Finance David Dodge has been quoted as the worst budget in 40 years. Former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley and Deputy Prime Minister, and former Liberal Finance Minister for this Trudeau government, Bill Morneau, have all publicly stated that they don't agree with a lot of what this budget has included. It's not going to incentivize growth and investment in Canada, specifically discussions around the changes to the capital gains aspect of the bill. So there's an issue that, again, the Canadian Medical Association just came out. This is going to de-incentivize doctors to getting into family medicine and running family practices. And I think you've likely talked about it once or twice on your show, David, with different levels of politicians and representation. I think we have a doctor shortage in this country, and definitely in Bruce Grey and Owen Sound. So when you're bringing forth policies that are going to negatively or further exacerbate these shortfalls, I think it really questions what this budget's actually accomplishing. And as you said, despite them rolling out the majority of the announcements over the last few weeks before the budget was formally announced, which is actually a good tactic. I don't fault them for that. It's because normally when they put everything together, it comes out in one day. The news cycle lasts for 48 hours. One issue may get some publicity. By them rolling it out 2 weeks, you'd think they'd get some, they were, I think, hoping the Liberal government for more publicity and maybe a tick up in the polling and support for where they're going and the direction they're going. And the polling results that I just read this morning indicate it's actually done the more damage than any good. So I think in the end, I think that speaks volumes to they're just not connecting with what the needs of Canadians are, and they're not doing it in a manner that is resonating with voters. And ultimately, we'll see what happens, whether or not maybe some of the, I think they're hoping that some of their policies will see a change in tune once they be executed. But my other biggest criticism, there's a lot of the money that's announced in this budget is stuff they've announced years ago, or it's stuff that's back end loaded. It's never going to see the light of day. I know you want to get to the defense plan update, but when we get to that, when you talk about the money isn't coming now. It's coming 5, 6, 7 years from now. So they're re-announcing things. And I know when the debate first started on the budget last week in the House, Mr. Poilievre did an excellent job of reading quotes from the Liberal platform and budgets from 2015. 2016, And guess what? Word for word, almost what's in the budget now, and they have never delivered on any of it. So I think that's a fair criticism against the current government, is they've had 9 budgets now that they've promised a lot of this stuff, and it's never yet been delivered. And I think that's where Canadians rightfully should question, it's great with people that say what you want to hear, but if they can't actually walk the walk, it's not, they're not delivering for those Canadians that do need support or are looking for, especially financial support at the federal level.
Well, I've said this before and I'll say it again. I've seen political announcements of money made multiple times over a period of years. Doesn't matter what the color of the government is, it's a political tactic. And it sounds like that's, leopards don't.
It hasn't gone away, David. It
hasn't gone away, and leopards don't change their spots.
Yeah.
But, hey, it's a political tactic, and we'll just have to. And speaking of tactics, you touched on my next subject, and that's the defense budget, because there have been some big ticket items for defense, for the Navy, for the Air Force, especially the Air Force. But as you said, these are over the next 5 to 10 years. But we won't recognize the Air Force when 10 years from now. It'll be a totally different force.
Well, there's all sorts. I actually still think that the military isn't changing that fundamentally much. The Air Force is still going to be a platform dependent element of our Canadian Armed Forces, because that's what they do. They got to fly aircraft. The introduction of more drone technology, and stuff like that does change some of the composition and how do you support it. The Navy obviously is, and there's lots that needs to happen there, and a lot of money that needs to be expended. There is hints, and glad to see that they've at least hinted in the defense plan update the need to replace our subsurface capabilities or fleet, i.e. our submarines. They even actually hinted at nuclear capable subs, which I honestly think under this government will not happen, because the ticket, the price tag on that is pretty astronomical. They're not cheap to get into the nuclear submarine business. But they've at least hinted at the need to replace our current Victoria class subs. My sort of biggest, and I haven't read the whole defense plan update from front to back yet, but one of the things that I sort of found disappointing is I actually think they kind of moved in the wrong direction from where I think they actually had it right when they first came out with Strong, Secure, Engaged in 2017, where they talk about what they need the Canadian Armed Forces to do. And now they're getting into this laundry list, which is something I was critical of the previous Conservative government, is, we're going to buy the following. Well, that doesn't need to be in a defense plan update necessarily. I guess maybe that's the difference, is a plan update versus an actual revitalization of the defense policy. But what I'm getting at is getting into a laundry list of what you're going to buy at the grocery store, or buy at the defense supermarket, to equip that. That isn't what the political analysis should be. It should be, this is the type of capabilities, and this is the mission set that we expect from our members in uniform in the Canadian Armed Forces. So there is more going into the Arctic, and a more emphasis on that, which is something I fully support. But when you actually look what's the money aspect that's included in that update, well, they already cut $1 billion this past year of what they had promised earlier, so they're not even really getting back to that. And when you look at the numbers and when the money's flowing into the defense, it's all over the out years, not in the current fiscal year. And even at the end of it, where are they going to have us? 1.87 or 1.8% of our GDP forecasted. And so they're showing growth there that, is always questionable whether the country's economic GDP is going to grow that much. But my point is, they're still not getting us to the commitment that we signed up to 2013 or whatever year it was that we signed up to the 2% commitment with NATO, that has now been reaffirmed at the NATO level. And having been there just in February to Brussels as part of the NATO Parliamentary Association and being one of the Canadian reps, Europe is facing, recognizes the existential threat that Russia is to their way of life, not just to Ukraine, but to all of them. And they are actually all, the movement within NATO, everybody's getting a lot closer to, a lot more nations are in that 2%. Canada's now, I think, in the bottom 5 of the 32, I think 32 nations now that Sweden was accepted into NATO. We're in the bottom 5 to 7. And, like from a percentage of GDP, they are committed full-heartedly. In fact, they're even talking about reintroducing in some of those European nations obligatory service or conscription again, because they recognize they need to be ready if things go pear-shaped. So I'm just saying we got to take this serious. I'd like to see an actual plan that gets us to what we've committed to our allies and partners. And that's something we need to do. So it's something I'll continue to advocate for.
Yeah, and I think that I recall this week seeing that I think Germany has committed to a well over 2% increase in their defense budget for this very purpose, because they recognize the risk that Russia provides right now. And I have to say, I'm a little concerned about the Canadian forces sitting in Latvia. If Russia decides to do something, they're going to be, I hope they're well equipped. That's all I can say.
Well, they are they are. There's
but
always more to be done, and especially around certain things around air defense. Like there's a huge recognition, and I mean, you can read some of the Defense Committee reports that have come out. We need to do a much better job in Canada for all-round missile defense, all-round air defense capabilities. And it was kind of funny. We did the government announced over a year ago that they were going to give the Ukraine a whole pile of ground-based air defense capacity, and it was like, yeah, this is good, 100% supportive of it. Could we buy some for our own Canadian Armed Forces at the same time? Because we could use the same system, and then unfortunately that was announced. No pushback from any political party. Go ahead, please do this. And then the last time I checked, it still hasn't been delivered. So, which I know there was a Ukraine delegation just in Ottawa last week again, and a lot of pressure being put on by them to say, look, please deliver on what you promised. And so we'll see how this all plays out in the coming weeks and months.
Indeed, it's I recognize that in your committee work, you're right in the center of stuff that you see things we don't see.
I'm not seeing a lot on the defense side because I don't sit on that. Remember, what we do on National Security and Intelligence Committee is focus more on actually the apparatus internally from an oversight and, and responsibility and, all that stuff. That committee doesn't see it, but I do try to keep my finger on the pulse with what's going on in the Defense Committee, the Veterans Affairs Committee, and some of those other committees where obviously I have some experience.
Global affairs?
Yeah, I try to. It's just that they're covering so much. So obviously there's overlap. And I just don't, I've never sat in on it as a associate member or, to sub in at foreign affairs ever that I can think of, maybe once in my 4 years so far. So, the Canada-China Committee, I have participated in it and been involved with that, obviously, a couple times. But it's there is overlap, right? They do study things, but there's so much going on, and that's what's the toughest challenge for all MPs is track what's being studied at what committee, and then trying to get engaged and involved and track it. And that's why we break the team down, and we have permanent members associated with that. That's their job to get develop the expertise and at the same time kind of keep the rest of us up to speed when something's going on.
Sure. Well, I have to say that it seems like Minister Jolie is all over all the time. I mean, if she must have an incredible travel budget. Of course, she travels on the government credit card or on government aircraft. But my golly, she isn't in the Middle East. She's in the Far East, or she's in Europe, and
that's the job as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, that you really are Canada's top diplomat. So that's your job.
Yeah. Well, let's briefly touch on a couple of things. First of all, this is the centennial year of the Royal Canadian Air Force. I know you're Army, but hey, at least we can say congratulations to the RCAF.
Absolutely, 100 years, they've done some incredible things. My grandfather, late grandfather, passed away before I joined the military. He was a bomber pilot during World War II. Never got overseas, but was here in the training force actually posted down in New Brunswick. So I do have a connection to the Air Force as well, and one of my great uncles still alive. He flew the Starfighter, I believe it was, and stuff. I think they called it the Widowmaker because it was a very fast aircraft, but it did have some. It wasn't an easy aircraft to fly, so there is. It's great to see. The RCAF celebrate 100 years of existence, and right here in our own background, or our own town, with Billy Bishop and the museum, we have. Sort of one of the key people that helped make the Canadian Air Force so important, right? When you have a VC winner and somebody that had such an impact on the development, right from Owen Sound. So it's some unique history we're privileged to be connected to here in our neck of the woods.
And I'm sure if there are celebrations, you'll be involved as well.
Yeah, I tried to get over to a couple of them in Borden this past month when they officially, but I just couldn't. It didn't work out with events here. And so, there's already been a couple of events over in the Borden area, obviously, with this and some flybys and stuff. But I'm sure there'll be more events coming up throughout the year. Sure.
And just to close the circle a little bit. We have talked about the TC Energy Pump Storage Project, and I know in the past you've expressed concerns. We've got a couple of minutes left. Any further developments from your perspective at all?
No, not really. As I've really said publicly for the last couple of years almost now, is I'm still trying to get access, despite my security clearances, to the operational training and impact assessment on the base, because we were talking about the challenges the military is facing. The biggest challenge is actually the people side, the human resources. Significantly, 15,000 under strength in the military right now, another 10,000 under trained effective strength. Well, where do those people train in the Army in particular? In Ontario, base Meaford. And so how do you start a construction project that's going to take 5 to 10 years and rip up the busiest range on that base and understand how they're going to mitigate that and the impact that's having? So I'm still trying to get access. I've reached out to the newish Minister Blair of the Minister of National Defense, again, asking to get access. And I know there's been lots of dialogue. I had a pile of questions in the last few days alone from our municipal people asking questions too, because I know this is an issue being discussed at the municipal level.
Well, Alex, thank you. And I hate to say it, our time's up. Thank you for being a part of Politically Speaking. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And I'm sure before the summer, we'll be talking again.
Thanks, David. It's always great to be here.
Thank you. And thank you, friends, for being a part of Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. Oh, yes, we'll talk again.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
I'm Carol Merton. Please join me for HealthLink, a program connecting home, community, and healthcare. Please join me and watch HealthLink on Rogers TV.
Everyone wants to know about everything Blue Jays.
Blair and Barker know what's up.
Over under an 86.5 wins. I'm going to go over.
What's the story on Blue Jay Central?
Jamie, this Blue